question is implementation of the energy union strategy, what actually will now be done for gas in the upcoming winter gas package. I think that's the question for this workshop. As you know, we have two major work streams where we have had public consultations which were already concluded, and another one where it's still open. The first one is on the gas security supply regulation. It exists already as a legislative instrument, it's a regulation, but it was decided in the energy union strategy to open it, to improve it. As was demonstrated by the stress test, there's some scope for doing that. In the public consultation, we got a lot of useful and extremely insightful comments from stakeholders. I'll report on that in a minute. Then, as a second work item, we have the LNG and storage strategy, where the public consultation was just concluded not even 2 weeks ago. That is basically the one where we try to explore what barriers there are in respect of flexibility instruments, notably LNG as a major source of gas which comes from a liquid world market, and then storage. The role of storage has been a traditional way of ensuring secure supply, and looking at possible implications now with a changing environment, what can be done here. The third one is then the intergovernmental agreements decision, which was also decided to be looked at in the energy union. The public consultation is still ongoing, and the impact assessment also, but there's also foreseen to be part of the gas package, which will come towards the end of January next year, so basically in a few months' time. And then moreover, there's going to be a heating and cooling strategy, which looks at that important sector, which is done by our sister unit in Directorate C, C3 in DG Energy. But maybe let's start with LNG and storage, as it was also addressed by Mrs. Vălean. Diversification and flexibility. I think these are the two key words which we need to have in mind when trying to ensure secure supply. We would like to have all member states basically to have access to LNG, access as an additional gas source, and also to have sufficient storage capacity, which does not mean that every member state should have its own terminal or its own storage site, but have access to it. And the tool for that will be through regional cooperation, making sure that borders basically do not create undue barriers between member states. There cannot be a one-size-fits-all approach. That is absolutely clear. No uniform solution imposed by Brussels and so on, but regional solutions between the neighbors, which often share a common fate and have common issues. And this is what we basically see as the primary achievements to be made. Also, as part of the gas security supply regulation, where regional cooperation should be a major improvement in terms of what we have, in terms of what we have now, which is already a lot of consultations going on, very useful dialogues, but often it stays there. We do not necessarily have a fully integrated regional plan, risk assessment, but rather consultations, and then you take into account the opinion or you do not do it. So have a much stronger approach in the future for the regional aspects. And this is basically what we are trying to achieve in a nutshell. For both consultations, LNG and storage, but also the gas security supply regulation, we received more than 100 responses. So that was quite a significant turnout, and many of them actually also came from industry and industry associations, the large majority actually of those. We have accompanied the formal consultation process with lots of meetings, bilateral or in the gas coordination group workshops, which we have organized for both the regulation but also the LNG and storage strategy, to be absolutely sure that we are fully aware of what stakeholders consider relevant. We certainly do not want now to come forward with kind of an interventionist approach, which would somehow try to put a layer over the market. The primary objective remains and has always been to make sure the internal market works, to implement the third package, but to see where there are still bottlenecks. If it is a lack of implementation of the internal market, then we have to address that. If it's something which the market cannot resolve in certain difficult situations which may occur, then there may be some other tools which have to be considered, which would have to be outlined then in the risk assessments, and of course then the plans, the preventive action plans and the emergency plans, which should be established, and for which actually in the future we try to have a stronger role of the gas coordination group as the primary body to ensure peer review, to make sure that good practice is spread across the whole of Europe. We have a very diverse situation still today in Europe with markets which are nearly entirely liquid. There's basically no problem anymore in some areas of Europe, and others where this is far from being the case. And we hope that that the good practices will spread, but also we need to recognize, of course, the lack of infrastructures which are still quite pertinent in some areas. Not all areas in Europe have, unfortunately, yet access to liquid hubs. So they do exist, and there's not just one liquid hub, but not all areas have access to those liquid hubs. And there's a strong effort going on in making sure that the interconnections will be built through reverse flows, through the priority lists of projects of common interest, and through regional cooperation processes such as the Baltic regional cooperation process, which is called BEMIP. And in Southeastern Europe, we have a similar institutional setup, which is called CESEC. And there have been very thorough considerations of what is necessary to make sure that the internal market is further enhanced. Of course, we also have the issue of connecting the Iberian Peninsula to the internal market, which is not yet the case. The question is, of course, in terms of cost-benefit analysis, what precisely is necessary to achieve that, but it's certainly still an important issue. It was one and is still one for electricity. There were separate targets for achieving the interconnections, but for gas also, the internal gas market is simply not yet fully insured in that respect. In the LNG and storage strategy, we try to identify through this intensive stakeholder consultation the remaining barriers, basically to make sure that there can be a level playing field for new LNG services and users, and the technologies to have more transparency, to look at possible regulations and for terminals which may not make entirely sense, then also look at the issue of gas quality. The strategy will, of course, not solve all these issues all in one. The objective is to identify the issues for further work and to see what actually we should focus our resources on in the upcoming years. And then also see what potential there is for possible harmonization to the extent that it's necessary. Having said that, there is no one-size-fits-all approach for that, and there needs to be a flexible toolbox on the basis of regional cooperation. As I said, the key objectives are to complete the internal energy market, to get the gas where it's needed through interconnections to the infrastructure, and then also on the international side, promote efficient global markets, pursue where necessary international cooperation and dialogue, possibly even to facilitate that then, of course, in our regular interactions with important international partners such as Australia, also possibly in the future to be enhanced as an important LNG player, and promote also transparency and liquidity in global markets. The US is also a very important future player. The question is what exactly the EU should do and what can be left entirely to the market, but that's also an issue which we need to look at. And then on storage, equally we need to ensure well-functioning and undistorted markets and look at the regulatory barriers. To see also what that access is fully insured, and that there's no barrier basically which would somehow prevent those who want to use storage from really using it. The balance has to be struck between a hands-off approach by Brussels, leave everything to the market, and then basically look at precisely where the market might fail, where there is a possible issue of a public good for storage. For instance, you could look at the insurance value of storage, and so that basically the market in its free play would possibly underestimate it. That's always very difficult to find out how much that would be the case, but that's certainly, I think, an issue which we need to think about still, what precisely has to be done there. In terms of stakeholder input, I would also like to say that several stakeholders have actually called rather for a gas strategy overall, not just a more focused LNG and storage strategy. We do understand that. One of the objectives, of course, also to get more clarity on future gas demand. In our consultation document and also in the upcoming strategy, we plan to have in the annex an indication of the relevant modeling in that respect. We do recognize that there has been maybe some confusion in the annex of the consultation document. We apologize for a mistake of having mixed up the units, which gives a bit of a lower demand than actually would be the right one. However, it was based on the right scenario, which is the most recent one which we had, the energy efficiency scenario with 27% energy efficient, in line with the 2030 climate energy targets which were approved by the European Council. And there is now ongoing work on a new reference scenario, which will be fully consulted with member states, and which will come out in the course of next year, which will be, of course, also the basis then for any further conclusions. But the indications which we have so far is that overall the picture does not change, that gas demand in principle will remain in the range between 380 and 450 BCM, possibly a bit lower. But most importantly, the policy conclusion is that actually imports will at least remain stable because of sharply declining domestic production. Therefore, the relevance of any strategy in terms of secure supply, LNG, is absolutely there, because we remain as vulnerable as Europe as we have been so far. So I think that is the important thing. And of course, there can always be a range of different scenarios and assumptions, but we'll try to bring at least in an annex that more in the picture. So I think this is what I wanted to say at this stage. If you have any questions, we can discuss later on, and I'm most happy to share any further information on that if you like. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Stefan. Very interesting introduction. I think there's a lot we will go back to in the Q&A. And now I'd like to introduce our two eminent industry speakers. We span from north to south of Europe, from operations to policy. So we have Pierre Dumont from ENI, who is in charge of the global supply portfolio for LNG at ENI, if I'm not mistaken. He has a broad experience on LNG. And on his right, we have Anders Marvik, who is the head of the Statoil EU delegation. And he also has a broad experience of the industry and specifically of Brussels as well. Pierre, would you like to start with a quick comment?
Yes, so it's a pleasure for me to be here and to answer any questions and experience all together in respect of LNG and its importance in contributing to the diversification and the flexibility of the gas supply, as you mentioned, Stefan, which were two key words in my opinion. So indeed, LNG can for sure contribute to the diversification of supply in Europe. In my opinion, although the LNG still represents a relatively small share of the total supply portfolio of Europe. Today it's about 10%. For sure, it will contribute to enhancing the diversification of such supplies in the future. Yes, so we have some, yes. So I have, so I would like to move directly to the last one. So here we've been trying to show the various entry points for LNG in Europe. So you see there are many LNG terminals in Europe which are already operational. There are about 25 LNG terminals along the coast of Europe, of course. What can I say there is that unfortunately the rate of use of these LNG terminals has not been so high as expected by the industry over the past few years, to say the least. So about 25% of the total installed import capacity has been used. This is due to many factors. I don't think this is due to intrinsically European factors. I think it's rather due to global factors, simply because LNG was more has had more value at other places, especially in Asia. This is reflected in the pie on the left. So you see the green part is the total imported volumes of LNG in the world by the Asian market. Europe is the blue one, I think. So you see that Europe is a relatively small LNG importer as compared to the total market. We hope it will increase, of course, but the message here is that there is already a lot of import capacity in Europe, and we would like to see it being more used in the future, of course, as an industry and as an LNG seller, obviously. But nevertheless, it will still be a market driven by the Asian market, by the Asian demand in the future, I think. On the right-hand side, you see the share of the production of LNG in the world. So it's shared between Middle East, Africa, and what we call the Atlantic Basin. Yes, I have other slides. To give some messages. Well, this one is probably relevant to make the link with the message that has been given by Stefan. So, security of supply. In order to grant security of supply, we need, of course, security of supply goes together with security of demand. And in order to be attractive, Europe probably needs to be integrated as a market and attract LNG volumes for everywhere across the world. Will give Europe a better leverage into the global LNG market instead of being fragmented as it used to be years ago. So we have seen here a very positive evolution from 28 separate gas markets into a fully integrated market, or at least we are on the good way towards that direction. So we see that overall the total gas market in Europe is about 500 BCM. The share of LNG is there today about 50 BCM, so 10%, as I said before, although the import capacity is 4 times that amount. It's about 200 BCM. In order to contribute to that full integration, well, I believe that there are already enough LNG terminals being installed in Europe, and the idle capacity level is of course a good illustration thereof. in order to further increase the attractiveness of the LNG, at ENI we believe that we should. There has been a lot of attention in the past in having a north to south gas corridor or east to west gas corridor. We believe that by reinforcing a south to north gas corridor, we will make LNG more attractive. For instance, these days it's quite difficult to import LNG in Spain, and having this gas being shipped to Northwest European market, for instance, and the same comment would probably apply for Italy. So we believe that the EU should promote the investment that are necessary to build a single internal market and encourage the north to south corridor for gas, whether it's pipe or LNG. The comment is the same. And then interconnection between Spain and France on the one hand, and interconnection between Italy, France, Germany, and Belgium on the other hand are key elements in our view to further develop the attractiveness of Europe for LNG. Another consideration here that we can share is the fact that very recently important discoveries have been made at our doors, we could say, in terms of LNG distance. It's very close to us. So here it's a map representing the East Med or the Southeast Med part of the Mediterranean Sea. So we see that, and ENI there has played a big role in new discoveries in the field of which is named Sor, close to, it's in Egyptian waters, but it's very close also to waters in Israel and in Cyprus. In aggregate, all these fields have an export capacity or a potential today proved of about the same level as Norway. So it's quite important. And there are two ways to bring that gas to the European market. It could be through pipeline, of course, but it could also be through LNG. And there we could either consider building new liquefaction capacity somewhere, floating or onshore, or we could also consider using already installed liquefaction capacities in Egypt. They do exist these days, but now unfortunately they are idle simply because there is a lack of feed gas in Egypt. Egypt needs a lot of gas and they consume the gas themselves. But thanks to these new discoveries, we believe that gas could be available at rather short notice. I would even say at very short notice, because production could already be available in 2017, 18, 19. And in that respect, I think that ENI has been making interesting discoveries together with other industry players.
Yeah, I'll go straight away to Anders and then we can open the floor.
Okay, thank you. I think, first of all, I would like to welcome the Commission, what the Commission is trying to do, which hopefully will be some kind of relatively holistic gas package, LNG, storage, security supply, all these things together, coming out together, hopefully will be an attempt to think holistically. And I think an LNG will be important in this game, but as we've already discussed in detail here, there is enough LNG import capacity in Europe. There also is coming a lot of LNG on stream globally. So the liquidity of the global LNG market is improving dramatically. And I think one of the big changes over the summer is the actual drop in LNG pricing in Asia, which is a huge big drop, which is approaching European prices. So there's a huge big movements in the global LNG market. And I think but in a way, when you already kind of mentioned it, it's all about how do you get whatever LNG you import, how do you get it to the entire European market? So this is all about completing the internal energy market, get the infrastructure in place, so you actually have a market. And I think when it comes to energy union, when you get to 2030, the internal energy market is the enabler of all of the above. And to me, it's also the enabler of the other elements we're trying to achieve in the energy union, whether that is renewable integration across Europe, whether it's energy security, European ability to speak with a foreign common voice. And I think, but also more importantly, is to attract investment. A huge big market will attract investment, which we're lacking right now. And that will also drive competition, which drives innovation, which is then good for gas, but it's also good for the final consumer, because you have choice and you have a more optimal cost structure. And I think in those things we kind of get lost sometimes in debate, because I think when we talk a lot about energy, you talk about the consumer, actually it's the internal energy market that really can contribute to get optimal pricing and good pricing for consumers, and not least choice for consumers. Which is then back kind of into policy priorities. What should the Commission try to do? I think the Commission is trying to do the right thing. Whether member states and Council will approve and agree and do everything they have agreed to do is a different matter. And this is why we don't have an internal market today. I mean, we have it agreed by law. It should have been in place last year, and we don't have one. So to me, it's all about that. But we talk a lot about the security, demand security of supply, the whole geopolitical game. But also, to me, which is sometimes under-discussed in this debate, is implementation of national reforms, which is lacking in many European countries. Many European countries have retail monopolies on gas, on electricity, and that is not good for consumers. So, but again, it's about Europe doing its own homework, having national reforms, implementing internal energy market. This is about nobody else but EU, us in this room, actually doing the homework. That is the key. Then we have, so what are we doing? We have a project of common interest, which is kind of the prioritized project list. I think 248 projects is probably 240 too many. Well, I don't know the right number, but the point is, if you really have to prioritize, you probably have to prioritize harder to really show effect. Because the Commission will have 5 years now, 4 years, to prove that the energy union is working. There needs to be tangible result. And if you don't prioritize and get some pretty, some of the most important projects in place, it's hard to show progress. So that is, but it's difficult, because if you prioritize, some countries won't get, some causes won't get, and we have in this house, we have a huge big debate about the ring fencing energy efficiency, ring fencing that, there's all, and they're all good causes, and nothing's wrong. It's just which one do you prioritize to do first, and that is a very hard political debate. But we have to have that debate. And then, of course, what haven't been mentioned yet, if we don't really get the carbon price going, if the ETS is not going to work, all of this becomes horribly difficult to do. So that is the other one, which is connected to this heavily and has to come into place. So again, the reform proposals and the actual MSR that has been going through is great, but it's step one and hopefully many steps, because we're still not there. We still not have the price that really makes a difference. And it makes a difference for the climate, but also for investments, which is kind of my big point here, which is how can EU attract more investments? That is the key crucial. One thing is, okay, prioritize the projects, have the plan, everybody agree, hopefully, and everybody do what they have agreed, but then how do you attract investments? Because I think the Juncker fund is great, but it will never be enough to fund everything. So how do you attract investments? And there, unfortunately, right now, there are some numbers which are not encouraging. And this is not just for gas. This is all over the energy field. So I think, if you look at the Financial Times have this foreign direct investment tracker, and your investments into Europe are down, and investment into renewable are down, which is not a good story. The Bloomberg had a clean tech investment tracking coming out last week, which showed that the European renewable or clean tech investments are down 48%. That won't make us leading in renewable, but also it won't attract investment necessary in the entire energy system. And I think and also more worryingly, if you look at the IEA Clean Tech Tracking report that came out this summer, we're behind on all the investment patterns. So even though renewable is growing, so even though a lot of things are happening, not enough things are happening. And in Europe, it's the same story. There are some global issues, but in Europe, it's definitely true. So how do we attract investments? And to me, it's back to the first point. The internal energy market, a liquid competitive market, will attract investments. So we're back in a circle. And of course, the Commission have done all the right things and have tried to do this for a long time. So this is about, can the Council, can the Member States actually deliver? And I know there's some very good and bad reasons why it hasn't happened, and they are valid, they are there, they are existing. But how do we solve for those? So I think if you, and then there's the whole, what will be the demand? So I welcome, and hopefully we get a report, an update soon on what the European gas demand is estimated to be. Because for the gas investments, if there's a low demand story, if there is conflicting signals on the importance of gas and the gas market, internal energy market, then I think diversification will be difficult, because who is going to invest long term into a shrinking market? And that is where there's domestic, where there's Russian gas, Norwegian gas, where there's American LNG or Egypt, it doesn't matter where it comes from. If there is no market, if there's not a big market, if it's not at least stable market, then it's very hard for boards to say, look, yes, we're going to invest. Let me use the big project, so the Southern Gas Corridor. If you go to your board and say, we're going to invest $45 billion US, you better be sure what you're doing. And I think that is crucial. And I'll end there. Thank you.
Okay. I was deciding whether I should ask the first question or open to the floor, but I see a hand up, so definitely go ahead.
David Abiyago, journalist for Argus Media. I wanted to come back to the figures in the annex. You said sorry, or you gave excuses. I think that was one of your words. But I remember the consultation paper by Eurogas, which seemed, for me, reading various consultation papers, seemed to reflect quite a lot of concern about those figures. Was it 30% down by 2035 in terms of gas demand? I was wondering, also for panelists, and as you just mentioned it, what kind of negative signal is that 30%? And then for the Commission, the decreasing gas demand, that seems actually a goal of EU strategy. With the energy efficiency, to use less energy. How do you tie that in with, the push for security of supply by getting new sources, diversification?
Thank you for your question, which allows to deepen that. Indeed, if we look at the energy union strategy, it's of course an approach which has several objectives at the same time, and one of them is sustainability. It's decarbonization, but it's also moderation of demand of energy, as you say. So indeed, that is the goal in itself. And that is also a way to address security of supply. At the same time, of course, we want to make sure that markets can work, that they have a stable basis for taking investment decisions, which I think, Anders, you've mentioned. Boards cannot decide in the vacuum.